Well, perhaps that has whetted your appetite to discover a little more about Sherlock Holmes' famous adversary, Professor Moriarty. So here is Alan Moore to read from the book by H.R.F. Keating, Sherlock Holmes, The Man and His World, In Search of Professor Moriarty.
At about this time, Holmes began to detect from his many sources in the underworld of London the presence of some organizing figure behind the worst crimes of the day. He knew who this was. A much more dangerous example of the atavistic than any he had yet encountered. One Professor James Moriarty. In Holmes's own words, a man of good birth and excellent education, endowed by nature with a phenomenal mathematical faculty. But the man had hereditary tendencies of the most diabolical kind. A criminal strain ran in his blood. What else do we know from Watson's narratives of this Napoleon of crime? With his face forever oscillating from side to side in a curiously reptilian fashion. We know that he had two brothers, one a colonel, the other a station master. He was the author at the age of 21 of a treatise on the binomial theorem that gained him a European vogue and his university chair. And his book, The Dynamics of an Asteroid, Einstein in 1905 was to write the electrodynamics of moving bodies, ascended to such rarefied heights that there was no man in the scientific press capable of reviewing it. We know that when he was forced to leave his university because dark rumors were circulating, he became, as a cover for his criminal activities, an army coach, and that he was an excellent instructor, enlightening Inspector MacDonald wonderfully on eclipses when that excellent fellow with his good Aberdeen upbringing went, after Holmes's hints, to take a cautious look at him. But we can add something to the facts of Watson's accounts, because Moriarty bears a telling likeness to another man of the period who gained a university chair in his 20s and subsequently had to resign it. Another genius, philosopher, abstract thinker. The words are Holmes's own labels for Moriarty, who became execrated as a figure of evil, the German Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche, philosopher, abstract thinker, and a recognized genius, was not unknown in England, at least to those acquainted with German culture at this time. And the influence of Germany then was enormously much stronger than it had been at any period since the start of the First World War, ranging from the championship of Carlyle down through the ineradicable German accent of Edward, Prince of Wales, to the German Ocean, now the North Sea. Holmes looked somberly at its violet rim at a low point in his tackling of the dancing men case, to the presence in the streets everywhere of German bands, and in hotels of what the contemporary historian T.H.S. Escott called the ubiquitous German waiters, one of whom Holmes questioned during the Baskerville case. Nietzsche was a man who had dared to criticize, and with passion, both Christianity, God is dead, and bourgeois conformism. He was seen for long, however he may be thought of now, as yet another manifestation of the rot that had set in with Darwin's overturning of the time-sealed order of things. In place of the picture of man's mind as a rational machine, current, if not unchallenged, since the days of Locke in the 17th century, he proposed a panorama of darkness and treacherous hidden depths. His book, The Birth of Tragedy, in those days his most influential work, had drawn a vivid contrast between the orderliness that belonged to Apollo, the bright sun god, and the deliberately sought wildness of the disciples of Dionysus, god of fertility, otherwise Bacchus. And he insisted that Dionysus must be given his due, that through music, rhythm, and dance, and by implication drugs, like a 7% solution of cocaine, man must achieve heightened states of being. He put forward the idea of the Superman, and that human weakness, all too human weaknesses, was bringing a crisis of self-hatred to European civilization, a twilight of the gods, an idea echoed by his admired friend Richard Wagner. At the end of the Red Circle affair, Holmes was to drag Watson to a Covent Garden Wagner night. If we hurry, we might be in time for the second act. So we may well ask if Holmes, the Superman detective, did not share with his equal and opposite opponent, Moriarty, more than a little of the Nietzschean attitudes. It was on the 24th of April, 1891, that Holmes walked one evening into the consulting room at Watson's abode of married bliss. edged his way round the walls, flung the shutters together over the window, bolted them securely, and dropping into a chair, showed his old friend the burst and bleeding knuckles of his right hand. He then recounted to Watson the way in which his long, secret battle with Moriarty had at last brought the man himself to Baker Street. "You crossed my path on the 4th of January, Moriarty had said. "On the 23rd, you incommoded me. By the middle of February, I was seriously inconvenienced by you. At the end of March, I was absolutely hampered in my plans." Holmes naturally had declined to draw back. "If you are clever enough," Moriarty had said, "to bring destruction upon me, rest assured I shall do as much to you." "You have paid me several compliments, Mr. Moriarty," Holmes had answered. "Let me pay you one in return when I say that if I were assured of the former eventuality, I would, in the interests of the public, cheerfully accept the latter." Holmes told Watson that he needed to avoid for a few days more the murderous attacks of Moriarty's henchmen, such as the "gentleman upon whose front teeth I have barked my knuckles," and then his trap could be sprung. Watson agreed to accompany his friend to the continent for that period, finding him next morning in a first-class compartment on the Dover Express disguised as a venerable Italian priest. And even though Moriarty engaged a special and followed them, racketing along the rails, they succeeded in getting safely to France and making their way, not without a sign or two that they were still being pursued, to Switzerland. But there, as they arrived at the tremendous and awe-inspiring falls at Reichenbach, a Swiss lad came running after them with a note from the hotel at Meiringen, where they had spent the night, asking Watson to return and give his professional services to an English lady dying of consumption. The appeal was one which could not be ignored, Watson tells us. And so he hurried away, casting one last glance back at his friend, gazing down at the rush of the mighty waters. But at the hotel, the note proved a forgery. Watson raced back to find only a letter from Holmes. "My dear Watson, I write these few lines by the courtesy of Mr. Moriarty, who awaits my convenience for the final discussion of those questions which lie between us. I have already explained to you that my career had in any case reached its crisis. Indeed, if I may make a full confession to you, I was quite convinced that the letter from Meiringen was a hoax. Pray give my greetings to Mrs. Watson, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes."
In Search of Professor Moriarty was taken from the book Sherlock Holmes, The Man and His World by H.R.F. Keating. The reader was Alan Moore, and the producer was Brian Miller.